Humans are by far the most prevalent, influential, and for the purpose of a lore video, most described people of the Symbaroum RPG. There is so much lore on humans, actually, that I can't possibly cover it all in one video. So today, I will focus only on the history of the humans. A secret history shrouded in the mists of time that not even the most accomplished scholars of the Ordo Magica know in its fullness. If that interests you, like this video and subscribe to my channel. The next video in this series will be the philosophy of Symbaroum, and I promise you don't want to miss that. Also, before we dive into today's topic, be warned, there will be spoilers for the Throne of Thorns campaign. I won't go into any story details of the campaign, but the history I'm going to present is unknown to the player characters. But the scholarly types among players might puzzle it together over the course of the campaign, and if you are this kind of player, you might spoil your enjoyment of the campaign by continuing watching this video. Now, let's start with the secret history of humans. At present, the humans live as two distinct people in the Drivethrough region. They are the tribes that live at the edges of the forest. Traditionally, they are nomadic hunter-gatherers, though in recent times they have built permanent settlements and started farming, a lifestyle they have adopted from their southern neighbors. For hundreds of years, these nomadic tribes have eked out a living in the shadow of the forest, guided by witches who kept their oral traditions and enforced taboos that kept them away from the dangers of old Symbar. Hunting and gathering for food, never staying in one place for long, living with the constant threat of predators, monstrous abominations, and starvation. The Umbrians call them barbarians. They are not a single kingdom, but many small tribes that form a loose alliance, united by language and tradition rather than a central power. In contrast, to the south of the forest live the recently arrived Umbrians. They are comparable to late medieval Europe in their technology and lifestyle. By cultivating the land, farming and raising livestock, they produce an abundance of food that allows them to live in big numbers in permanent settlements. These villages, towns and cities are fortified with walls and well defended by a standing army. In their temples they venerate the sun god Prios as both the lawbringer who guides civilization and helps them through their darkest times, and the life-giver, the god of warm summers and bountiful harvests. In his name they cultivate the land, constantly pushing back the wilderness and cutting down the trees of the forests to make room for fields and pastures. Umbrian spellcasters organized in the Ordo Magica. They believe in reason and science and try to uncover the mysteries of the world through study and experiment. They gather their knowledge in vast libraries recorded on gold parchment and handcrafted paper. Their spellcraft is mighty. Their ritual magic can break castles and devastate armies. And the Umbrian alchemists can both strengthen life or destroy it. But not all is well within the kingdom of Queen Corinthia Nightbane. Squabbling nobles are fighting for power, plotting her downfall behind her back. Every day, more and more refugees arrive from the south over the Titans from their old home in Alator. Ever more people to house, ever more mouths to feed, the Umbrians have no choice but to expand ever further northward into the forest of the Death Shadow, Drivethrough. An expansion that not only brings them into conflict with both the clans that already live in the area and the Elves of the Iron Pact, but exposes them to both the knowledge and riches of old Symbar, but also its dangerous artifacts and corrupting magic. But even more trouble is arising within the very heart of the so-called Promised Land. There are seemingly spontaneous outbreaks of blight, a corruption usually born from an overuse of magic that turns its victims into ravenous abominations. Even the dead have become restless. It started with rare examples, but more and more recently deceased rise from their graves to an unnatural unlife, cursed to walk with the living, where their memories fade and their bodies decay. It was just 20 years ago that the Embrians have arrived in the region between the Davoka in the north and the mountain range of the Titans in the south. Fleeing from the homeland of Alberator, that had been left devastated and barren after the war against the Dark Lords, they arrived not as refugees, but as conquerors, with the mighty, war-hardened armies of Corinthia Nightbane leading the exodus. The divided and still mostly nomadic tribes of the region stood no chance against them. Most offered little resistance. They left their lands or arranged themselves with the new rulers. Those who did fight were quickly overwhelmed, brutally and efficiently. And thus, the Promised Land was conquered and the Kingdom of Umbria established. The ground was fertile, and the region rich in natural resources. At once, pious people went to work to cultivate the land and build cities and temples. Impressed by their lifestyle, not only people of the tribes joined them and imitated them, but also ogres and whole tribes of goblins. Within the ever-expanding Kingdom of the Sun, there was a place for everyone, and everyone got a chance to prosper. What the people of Alberator tried to forget, what their leaders deliberately wiped from history, was the fact that they themselves had destroyed their land. It was their use of ritual magic that not only devastated the Dark Lord's armies, but also robbed the land of its vitality, leaving it dead, corrupted, and infertile. But during the war, there was little choice. If not for the sacrifices of their soldiers and their desperate abuse of magical powers, they might very well have been overrun and wiped out by the demon armies of the Dark Lords. 40 years ago, the Dark Lords of Lystra invaded the neighboring kingdom of Alberator, starting the Great War. The armies of demons and undead were led by undead generals, mighty sorcerers who, due to their undead nature, could cast spells and summon demons without end. For the sorcerers of the Order Dakothnik had found out that undead are already fully corrupted, and thus cannot suffer from blight and become blight-born abominations when they exceed their human limits for spellcasting. They had conceived a ritual that could turn a human into an undead, but with all of their senses, memories, and mental faculties preserved. They were thinking that they had found a way to achieve pure magic, a legendary form of magic that allowed spellcasting without corruption, thus granting its users total control over the powers of creation. With the hope of expanding the prosperity of their great realm of Lystra even further, in great rituals, 16 apostles and 20 judges of the Order Dakothnik were exalted. All but the patriarch of the order, Kalthar, the Dark Lord himself, was already considered to be the highest and purest. But to his horrors, it did not take long before the black hunger of undeath began to cloud the minds of the exalted. They turned on each other, on the laws of Dakothnik, and on the patriarch himself. Hoping to buy enough time to devise a ceremony that could scatter the darkness, Colthar did the only thing he could to prevent a full-scale civil war. He gave the people a common enemy, Alator. About 200 years ago, the whole population of Lindaros was wiped out by a blood-coughing plague. Lindaros was a prosperous kingdom, inhabiting the same region as today's Umbria. Umbria's capital, Indaros, is even built on the ruins of the city of Lindaros itself. The mass death of Lindaros happened so fast that neither the populace nor the authorities realized that something was wrong until it was too late. Having learned their lessons from the fall of Symbaroum, the Lindarians enacted strict laws regulating the use of mystical powers and rituals, but the perceived security this brought was merely an illusion. In the absence of prominent mystics, the alchemists Lindaros learned a lead, and the branch of alchemy they cultivated the most was the refinement of crops and livestock. Lindarian fields produced astonishing harvests, and in their cramped stables the pigs and cattle were so swollen that, before being slaughtered, they could not even carry their own body weight. The cultivation was governed by rigid safety regulations. However, the latent mutagenic properties of a buttery crop called king's corn were not detected during the testing phase, which resulted in the legendary bleeder's disease breaking out and obliterating the entire population, except for a few members of the priesthood of Darkothnek, forever preaching moderation and temperance, of being mindful of the effects that human endeavors have on the natural world. They were far enough removed from the mainstream alchemical practices, and a few of them had never eaten the mutagenic king's corn. After fleeing away from the blight and death to the south, the survivors later found their way to the realm of Lystra, where they settled down, and over time, the Order Darkothnek became the ruling elite of the realm. About 480 years ago, the Iron Pact was formed in the middle of the war between the human tribes living in Davokar and the giant sapient spiders that also inhabited the region. Perhaps it was the war that made the humans forget their agreement with the elves. The passage of time certainly contributed as well. The tales, songs, and plays of their oral tradition started to seem more like myth and pure fiction. In any event, the high chieftains and their warriors and witches pushed deeper and deeper into the forest, in a way that the elves could not accept. But after a few violent confrontations, Prince Eneano chose a diplomatic approach. He walked alone to the High Chieftain's stronghold on Kavosti, where he made High Chieftain Agadan and his Huldra Bovosin understand the importance of preserving the slumber of Symbaroum. The Iron Pact was founded during a meeting between 10 clan chieftains and 3 elven princes. The tribes swore to respect the taboos and leave the ruins of Symbar to slumber for all time, and the elves swore not to interfere in the war against the Spider King and let the humans live in peace in the outskirts of the forest. A few decades later, the 5th human ruler of Kavosti, High Chieftain Majestica, was finally able to slay the Spider King, Angathatar, and put an end to the war. 500 years ago, the Spider King declared war on the human tribes. While the humans started to regain their former strength, the spiders and the spider people thrived under the ocean of leaves. Neither witches nor elves can explain exactly why Angathal-Tar declared war on humanity, but many potential reasons have been theorized. A lust for power, self-preservation, or a belief that the humans would repeat the sins of Symbar. In any case, the threat of the spiders accelerated the collaboration that had already started to form between the clans. The office of High Chieftain was established, and the clans united for the first time under a common banner. About 800 years ago, the survivors of Symbaroum returned to their ancestors' homeland, now overgrown by a wild, sprawling forest. The Elves would not let them enter the burgeoning Davokar, so they settled on its outskirts, divided into clans which had emerged during the years of exile, often based in what used to be the provinces of Symbaroum. Wise from the memories that lived on in stories, songs, and plays, most of them submitted to the Elves' will without a fight. According to the stories of the Hulduras, this was also when the already existing witchcraft was refined, a form of mystical practice which the Elves accepted, maybe even helped to develop. Between 800 and 900 years ago, the Elves grew the forest of Davokar to bury the ruins of Symbaroum. The task of singing and weaving the region's remaining corruption to sleep and planting Davokar to bind the darkness with its roots was an enormous undertaking that took decades. But with the help of the trolls that confined the spread of corruption in the underworld, it was done. Numerous blight-born humans, abominations, and primal blight beasts were lulled to sleep, covered by earth, moss, and mycelium. They could have been killed, but Prince Eniano's orders were clear. Let this evil that mankind awakened remain in idle slumber. Let it live on as a reminder of the gravity of our undertaking. What happened here must never be repeated. Nevermore. 900 years ago, the forces of Symbaroum were defeated by the Elves, and the capital of Symbar destroyed. The Battle of Symbar was long and exceedingly bloody. An army of Elves, aided by spiders, bestials, colossi, arc-trolls, and even nature's spirits, collided with Symbar's forces of humans, undead, abominations, demons, and even blight-born dragons. The battle was fierce, desperate, and lasted for days. Tens of thousands were killed, and the rivers ran red with blood. In the end, the alliance under Prince Eniano of the Elves emerged victorious, and Symbaroum fell into dreamless slumber. Less than a year before the fall, the Emperor Symbar was assassinated. It was the priests of the Kothnik, forever preaching temperance and moderation, who made Emperor Symbar realize the severity of the situation, that his people were once again on the verge of destroying the world, along with themselves. Symbar outlawed all common mystical practices in Symbaroum under the punishment of death. Night patrols were established. Led by symbolists and staff mages, they scoured the cities to root out any sorcerers, corrupted creatures, and sources of corruption. But by then it was too late. The Emperor had lost control, and as the strength of the external enemies grew, so did the risk of internal chaos and civil war. Finally, a coup d'etat was orchestrated by the already exalted nobles of Symbaroum. 1,100 years ago, the armies of Symbar defeated their last rival and became the only dominant force in the Davokar region. The empire grew to immense size and power. The Symbarians viewed abominations and other unworldly creatures as powerful versions of the chosen and exalted human form. As Symbaroum continued to grow, so did the zeal to free humanity from the inhibitions pressing their divine being. Morphology, the study of the human being's shape and form, was predominant among its scholars, and from it emerged the theurgical practices which were meant to set their divinity free, to ennoble, improve, and strengthen the human physiognomy. The emphasis on spiritual and physical enhancement grew, and the importance of challenging oneself became vital for retaining one's honor, power, and status. The animals, spirits, and wardens of the wild were slaughtered. Even abominations were hunted down and slain by humans seeking to affirm their power and supremacy. 1,400 years ago, Symbar destroyed Ambel-Seba, the spiritual center of the human realms. After their encounter and defeat by the giant Garavarax of Kavosti, the Symbarians started abandoning symbolism in favor of more aggressive mystical practices, without the guidance of the traditions that were later developed to reduce corruption's impact on the body and world. It seems that what are now known as blight marks were considered a status symbol, and that blight birth were seen as a sacred sign. Along with the corruption grew a lust for power, and eventually Symbar, the name of both the realm and its ruler, raised his sights, hungry for more land to dominate, more people to rule. But in his way stood the symbolists in the Order Dakothnic of Ambal-Seba, forever preaching moderation, temperance, and the dangers of mystical powers and their corruption. But their power had already been fading for centuries, and they could not stand against the growing might of Symbar. Thus, Ambal-Seba fell, the empire of Symbaroum began, and the Order Dakothnic became a part of the empire. About 2,050 years ago, the city of Ambal-Seba was founded. Hundreds of thousands of people migrated across the mountain ranges of the Ravens from the east, fleeing their former home of Asparast that had turned into a lifeless desert, to make a new home for themselves in the undulating moorlands that today are covered by the Davokar. The new country was vast and fertile, full of virgin fishing grounds and farmlands. The exodus across the mountains had divided the people early on, when the heads of various powerful families and factions brought their followers along and found their own areas to control. But Ambal-Seba was the spiritual and cultural center for humanity's conquests, home to the symbolism and high priestess Sidriana of the Order Dakothnic as a partly unifying force. However, in the centuries that followed, the humans suffered greatly at the hands of the power that ruled the land before them, the giant Garavarax of Karvosti. Sidriana negotiated a treaty that gave humans the right to cultivate the land in exchange for sacrifices and a promise never to develop weapons or powers with the intention of harming Karvosti. The cultural beings who already inhabited the region by the grace of Karvosti were, more or less violently, pushed aside, and over time 47 small city kingdoms were established near rivers and lakes, on mountain slopes and moors. The trolls were particularly brutalized, nearly wiped out. Only those who fled underground survived. That is not to say that humanity did not have its own struggles. The early days were plagued by numerous conflicts with the Lord of Karvosti, who responded with force whenever some petty king appeared to have violated the treaty, killing ruthlessly and indiscriminately, sometimes entire villages and cities. Additionally, The region was tormented by two insatiable dragons, Fulfar and Sarkophal, also known as the Destroyer and the Slaughterer. Last but not least, the war for the region's resources became more frequent and deadly as the influence of Ambal Seba diminished. The refugees from Asparast were no longer one people, but many. 2,100 years ago, the great city of Asparast was abandoned. It was the capital of a great realm the world had never seen before or since. The heart of the first human civilization that emerged beyond the ravens to the east. But there's nothing left of Asparast, not even ruins, either above or below ground. The only exceptions are the three city walls, partially crumbled, but still doggedly defying the ravages of time. The outer wall, roughly the height of 5 men, the middle wall, twice that, and the inner wall so towering that even the palace of Indaros could hide behind it. Asparast mystics had access to what is called pure or raw magic, creative powers untainted by corruption or other negative side effects. Alator tells of a city beyond mountains and vales, where the power was pure as freshly fallen snow, where Vrata was blind and deaf, lost in carefree sleep. But this turned out to be false. Eventually, Vrata awoke and turned on Asparest with a vengeance. Even after outlawing every practice of magic but symbolism, the realm could not be saved. Crops turned to dust, and fertile fields became deserts. Asparast became a barren wasteland of ash and dust. About 3,000 years ago, the first humans arrived in this world from Nether, flying on ships of stone. They had fled their homeworld in a mass exodus after the ravaging demons and corruption their magic had created had turned it into a blight-infested hellscape. Today, we call this world the Underworld, the realm where blight-mad sorcerers call demons from. I think you can spot a pattern here. Well, that is something that I will explore in my next video on this topic, where I will take a deep dive into the philosophy of Symbaroum. I thank you all for watching, and I wish thee safe travels, dreamer, until we shall meet again.